That day, while driving my elderly neighbor to a doctor's appointment, I was pulled over by the police for speeding. I thought it would just be a simple ticket, but the officer looked at my driver's license and frowned. "According to the system, you were declared dead 2 years ago. We need to bring you to the station to verify your identity." My heart seemed to stop. Little did I know that investigation would uncover a truth even crueler than death: the betrayal of my own family. Hello, my name is Roman Wright. I'm 38 years old, living in a quiet corner of rural Fairview, Pennsylvania, where red dirt roads wind through endless cornfields. If you ask the locals around here, they'll say I'm the man who's been through a great tragedy. They don't know much about me, and I prefer it that way. My life now consists of long days working on my modest farm where I grow corn, raise a few chickens, and try to keep my mind occupied. But at night, when the flickering oil lamp glows on the wooden table, I can't escape my past. I wasn't always like this. 5 years ago, I was a different person in a different place with a life I once thought was perfect. But then in a single moment, everything fell apart. And now, here I am in Fairview. This is a small town where everyone knows each other but doesn't pry too much. Wooden houses are scattered among the fields, and every morning the smell of freshly cut grass mingles with the scent of damp earth. I came here 5 years ago after selling everything from my old life: my company, my house, my cars, and even the dreams that used to keep me up at night. Now I live in a small wooden cabin with a rusty tin roof and windows that creak in the wind. I like the quiet here, though sometimes it feels suffocating. The people here are kind, but they keep their distance. They know I'm not a local, that I came here to escape something. They whisper about me, about the man who lives alone with his past. I don't blame them. If I were them, I'd be curious too. Today was an ordinary day in Fairview. I woke up at dawn as always. The first light peeked through the fabric curtains, illuminating the worn wooden floor. I made coffee, ate a slice of bread with eggs, and headed to the chicken coop. The chickens clucked noisily as I scattered their feed, and I smiled, if only briefly. The work on the farm isn't hard, but it keeps me busy. I mow the grass, water the vegetables, check the fences. Everything has its own rhythm, like a wordless song, and I've learned to blend into it. In the afternoon, I drove my old pickup truck to the general store in the center of town. Mrs. Deborah, the store owner, always greets me with a warm smile. "Roman, how's it going today?" she asked, as she always does. I replied in my usual even tone. "Doing all right, Mrs. Deborah." "Thanks." She didn't press further, but her eyes sparkled with curiosity. I know she wants to know more, but she respects my silence. I bought a few essentials: milk, bread, some nails to fix the fence, and headed home. As the sun set, I sat on the porch watching the cornfields sway in the breeze. The smell of earth and grass drifted by, mingling with the steady chirping of crickets. This is my favorite moment of the day, when the world seems to slow down, and I can pretend I belong here. But tonight something felt different. As I went inside, my eyes fell on the photo on the table. It was Angela and Rebecca, my late wife and daughter. Looking at that photo, I felt as though they were trying to tell me something, and my heart ached with a familiar pain. I sat down, picked up the frame, and for the first time in months, I let myself cry. My story, to be honest, I'm not ready to tell, but tonight I feel the need to start. Maybe because I'm tired of running. Maybe because for once I want to be honest with myself. 5 years ago, I was 33 years old, living in Orlando, Florida, in a stunning glass house overlooking a shimmering lake. I was the CEO of Horizon Travel, a travel company I had built from the ground up. My company organized trips around the world, from the white sand beaches of the Maldives to the snow-capped peaks of the Alps. Forbes once called me the rising star of the travel industry. Friends admired me, colleagues respected me, and I believed I was living the American dream. I had a Porsche parked in the garage, a collection of expensive wines and tailored Italian suits. But above all, I had Angela, the wife any man would dream of, and Rebecca, our 4-year-old daughter with a smile as bright as sunshine. My life back then was like a perfect painting, but if you looked closely, you'd see the cracks. Work was the center of my world. I woke up at 5 in the morning, checking emails the moment my eyes opened, and worked until midnight. Endless meetings, constant business trips, risky deals. All of it was fuel to keep Horizon Travel at the top. But the cost was time. Time with Angela, with Rebecca, and with myself. Angela was a strong yet gentle woman. She had glossy brown hair, deep blue eyes, and a voice that always carried comfort. One rare evening when I came home early, she said to me, "Roman, you need to rest. Family is what matters." I remember laughing, holding her hand and promising to slow down. "Just after this busy period, love," I said, but one busy period always led to another. Angela didn't blame me, but I saw the disappointment in her eyes. When she quietly cleared the dinner table alone, or when she tucked Rebecca into bed while I was still at the office. Rebecca, my little girl, was the brightest light in my life. She had curly blonde hair, big round eyes, and always wore a tiny pair of pink sneakers she called her speedy shoes. Rebecca loved running around the house, dragging me to the backyard to play or begging me to read her bedtime stories. "Daddy, play with me," she'd plead, tugging at my hand while I stared at my laptop. I always promised tomorrow, sweetheart. Daddy promises. But tomorrow rarely came. I thought I had a lifetime to make up for it. I was wrong. The pressure didn't just come from work. My parents, Eugene and Martha, were another burden. My father had once owned a small auto repair shop on the outskirts of Orlando, but it failed due to his arrogance and poor management. He was drowning in debt, yet instead of admitting it, he always acted like he knew better than everyone else. Every time we met, he'd talk about his glory days and then subtly criticize me, saying I was lucky rather than talented. "Watch out, Roman," he'd say. "You think you're hot stuff, but one mistake and it all comes crashing down." My mother, Martha, was the opposite. She was a vain woman obsessed with maintaining an image of sophistication despite the family's long-gone wealth. She shopped incessantly, dresses, jewelry, trips to keep up appearances. I was the one who paid those bills. Every month she'd call, her voice sweet but calculated. "Roman, can you help your mother out? Just a few $1,000s to take care of your father." I always sent the money, not because I wanted to, but because I felt obligated. They were my parents, though sometimes I wondered if they truly saw me as their son. The pressure from work, family, and myself kept piling up. Horizon Travel was at its peak, but the industry was growing more cutthroat. Shareholders constantly demanded higher profits. I had to negotiate with major partners, weigh risky deals, and keep the company from being swallowed by emerging competitors. I started losing sleep, relying on coffee and strong drinks to get through the long days. Angela noticed, but I brushed it off. "I'm fine," I said, but I was anything but fine. One evening, when I came home late, Angela was sitting on the couch, cradling a sleeping Rebecca. She looked at me, her voice low but firm. "Roman, you can't keep going like this. Rebecca needs her father and I need my husband." I wanted to hug her, to promise I'd change, but my phone buzzed. A partner from Europe was calling about an urgent issue. I gave Angela an apologetic look and stepped onto the balcony to answer. When I came back, she was already in bed, and all I saw was her silhouette in the dark. Those days I was like a tightrope walker, trying to balance work, family, and endless expectations. I thought I could handle it all, that I was strong enough to keep everything in my grasp. I was terribly wrong. One weekend, I decided to take Angela and Rebecca shopping, hoping a fun day would ease the tension. That was the day I lost everything. It was a radiant Sunday morning in Orlando, with golden sunlight stretching across palm-lined streets. Angela wore a light blue dress, her brown hair tied up high, her gentle smile seeming to wash away all my exhaustion. Rebecca, my little girl, bounced around in her favorite pink sneakers, clutching a doll she called Princess Cat. "Daddy, I want a big ice cream today," she chirped, her eyes sparkling. I laughed, ruffling her hair. "All right, princess. Today, Daddy's going to spoil you." Angela glanced at me, her eyes a mix of love and concern. "No work today, right, Roman?" she asked, her voice soft but pointed. I raised both hands, grinning widely. "No phone, no laptop. Today's just for family." In that moment, I truly believed I could keep that promise. We drove to the mall, my SUV gliding smoothly along the highway. Rebecca sat in the back singing a children's song, her pink sneakers swinging to the rhythm. Angela told me about her plans to take Rebecca to Disney World the following week, her voice brimming with excitement. "You'll come with us, right?" she asked, resting her hand lightly on mine. I nodded, but my mind was already drifting to next week's meeting schedule, a major deal with a partner in Dubai. "Of course, love," I replied, but my voice lacked the conviction I wanted to convey. Then my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen, a call from Jack, the company's CFO. Probably something minor, I thought, and I answered. Angela looked at me, shaking her head slightly. "Roman, you promised." I held up a finger, signaling just 1 minute. "Jack, what's up?" I asked, my voice urgent. Jack started talking about a financial issue, an investment that was at risk. I felt a familiar surge of stress, my blood heating up. I tried to focus on the call, keeping my eyes on the road, but my mind was consumed by numbers, risks, and consequences. "Roman, put the phone down," Angela said, her voice no longer gentle. I heard the frustration in her tone, but I brushed it off. "Just a sec, love. This is important." Rebecca started singing louder in the back, as if trying to reclaim my attention. I turned to smile at her, still holding the phone. "Just 1 more minute, sweetheart," I said. 1 minute. That's all it took for everything to fall apart. I didn't see the truck coming from the right intersection. It appeared like a massive black shadow, moving so fast I had no time to react. A horn blared, Angela's scream of "Roman!" mingled with the horrific sound of metal crunching. Our car spun, glass shattered, and I felt my body lurch forward, the seatbelt digging into my chest. For a moment, everything slowed. Angela's scream, Rebecca's panicked eyes, and then darkness. When I opened my eyes, I was lying on a stretcher, the flashing lights of police cars and ambulances disorienting me. My head throbbed, but my body had only minor cuts and bruises. I tried to sit up, calling for Angela, for Rebecca, but a paramedic held me back. "You need to stay still," she said, her voice calm but firm. I didn't listen. I pushed her aside, stumbling to my feet, my eyes scanning the scene. Our car was a mangled wreck, the hood crumpled, the windows shattered. And then I saw them. Angela lay motionless on another stretcher, her face pale, her eyes closed. Rebecca, my little girl, was covered with a white blanket, but I could still see her pink sneakers peeking out from underneath. One shoe had come off, lying alone on the pavement next to a pool of blood. I screamed, lunging toward them, but 2 police officers held me back. "No, you can't," one shouted, but I didn't hear. I thrashed, yelling their names until my body gave out and I collapsed onto the road. The police later told me the accident was my fault. I hadn't been paying attention, hadn't seen the truck. The official report stated, "Driver distracted by phone use." Angela and Rebecca died at the scene. I survived with only minor injuries, but I felt like I had died too. Rebecca's little shoe stained with blood and dust was the last image I saw before I passed out. The days after the accident were an endless nightmare. I woke up in the hospital, my body aching with cuts and bruises, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the numbness in my mind. I lay there on a cold white bed, staring at the ceiling through the haze of fluorescent lights, feeling like my soul had been drained. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the truck barreling toward us, heard Angela's scream, and saw Rebecca's lone pink shoe on the pavement. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was trapped in my own body, caged by a guilt that felt like an iron band tightening around my chest. I didn't want to talk to anyone, didn't want to see anyone. The nurses, with their pitying looks and gentle voices, only made me feel more suffocated. I wanted them to leave me alone, to let me sink into the darkness where I could pretend it was all a dream. My parents came, and I hoped, even just a little, that they would offer some comfort. But when my mother walked in, her eyes red and her hands trembling as she hugged me, I felt no warmth. She sobbed, but her tears seemed to be for herself, for the refined image she always tried to maintain. "You had everything. How could you let it all fall apart?" she said, her voice choked but sharp. Her words weren't comfort. They were an accusation, as if I had deliberately destroyed everything. My father, sitting quietly in the corner, said little, but his eyes, cold, judgmental, made me feel like I wasn't just a failure, but a criminal. "How could you do this, Roman?" he asked, his voice low but cutting. I turned away, unable to answer because I had no words to justify myself. Inside, I wanted to scream, "I didn't want this. I didn't want to lose them." But I stayed silent, letting their blame blend with the inner voice screaming that I was a murderer. Angela and Rebecca's funeral took place on a rainy day, the gray sky weeping in my place. I stood before their two small coffins, feeling like my heart was being torn into sharp, jagged pieces. Angela's coffin, adorned with pristine white flowers, was a reminder of her gentle smile, of the times she held my hand and said everything would be okay. Rebecca's coffin, so unbearably small, made me want to collapse. I imagined her still there, with her curly blonde hair and pink sneakers, calling me Super Daddy and begging for a bedtime story. But she was gone, and I, the one who was supposed to protect her, had pushed her into the darkness. Friends, colleagues, and relatives came murmuring condolences, but I didn't look at anyone. Their eyes, whether filled with pity or judgment, made me want to disappear. I just stood there, soaked in the rain, my shoes caked in mud, my trembling hands clutching a white flower I didn't even remember picking up. I wanted to apologize, to kneel before Angela and Rebecca's coffins, to scream that I loved them more than anything in the world. But the words stuck in my throat, choked by a guilt that twisted like a knife in my heart. I just stood there, letting the rain mix with my tears, letting the pain seep into every fiber of my being, wondering if I would ever deserve forgiveness. That night, back in our empty house, I sat in the living room, staring at Angela and Rebecca's belongings. Angela's dress hanging in the closet, Rebecca's pink sneakers on the shelf. I picked up one of the shoes, held it to my chest, and cried. My sobs echoed in the now cold house like a curse that would never end. I knew I couldn't stay here anymore. Orlando, with all its glamour and memories, had become a prison. I had to leave, to escape, not from the world, but from myself. In the days following the funeral, I was like a ghost wandering through my own home. Every corner bore traces of Angela and Rebecca. The sofa where Angela used to sit and read, Rebecca's favorite comic book lying open on the table, the faint scent of Angela's perfume lingering in the air. I couldn't bear it. Every object, every sound, every ray of light filtering through the windows felt like a knife twisting in my chest. The media wouldn't let up, their headlines cutting like sharp blades. Horizon Travel CEO in tragic accident. Careless father takes family's lives. I didn't read them fully, but those words seared into my mind like a verdict needing no judge. The gazes of those around me became a burden. Old friends, colleagues, even neighbors. They looked at me with a mix of pity and judgment. He had everything, they whispered behind my back, and look at him now. I didn't blame them. They were right. I had everything, and I lost it all because of one foolish moment, because of a phone call I thought was more important than my wife and daughter's lives. But that truth didn't make the pain any easier. It only made me want to disappear. I decided to sell the company. Horizon Travel, the brainchild I had poured sweat and heart into building, was now just a reminder of what I had sacrificed. The shareholders protested, but I didn't care. I signed the papers, liquidated my shares, paid off my parents' debts, and used the remaining money to sever every tie to my past. The glamorous glass house by the lake, the Porsche, the wine collection, all were sold. I kept nothing except a family photo frame and Rebecca's pink sneakers. They were the last fragments of my old life, fragments I couldn't let go of, even though they caused me pain every time I looked at them. I chose Fairview, Pennsylvania as my refuge. I had taken clients on tours here in my youth when horizon travel was still a fledgling idea. I remembered the sprawling cornfields, the dusty red dirt roads, and the simple townsfolk who cared little for fame or wealth. Fairview, with its quiet and solitude, seemed the perfect place to disappear. I rented an old wooden cabin on the edge of town, its tin roof rusted and its windows creaking in the wind. The house was small, just enough for one person, but for me it was an entire world. A world where I could hide from the eyes of others and even from my own. In my early days in Fairview, I barely left the house. I sat in the dark with only the flickering oil lamp for company. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the truck hurtling toward us, heard Angela's scream. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding as if it might burst. I started drinking, not because I enjoyed it, but because it dulled the nightmares, if only for a few hours. But even alcohol couldn't erase the guilt. I asked myself 100 times, if I had put the phone down, if I had listened to Angela, if I had just watched the road, would things have been different? My parents called a few times after the funeral. My mother cried, offering empty words of comfort while my father was quieter, but I could sense the blame in his voice. "You need to move on, Roman," my mother said, but I heard the impatience in her tone. Just a few months later, they started asking for money again, as if my tragedy was just a minor inconvenience in their lives. "We're struggling, can you help us out?" my mother said, her voice as sweet as ever. I sent the money, not because I wanted to, but because I no longer had the strength to argue. I cut off contact with almost everyone, old friends, colleagues, relatives. I didn't answer their calls, didn't open their emails. I wanted to isolate myself, to punish myself with loneliness. In Fairview, I kept my interactions with the locals to a minimum. They were kind, but I maintained my distance. I was afraid that if I let them get close, they'd see through me, see the monster who killed his family. I worked on the small plot of land behind the house, planting corn, raising chickens, trying to let sweat and exhaustion drown out the thoughts in my head. But at night, when everything was quiet, the memories came back, sharp and merciless. One afternoon, while I was fixing a fence, an old man appeared at the gate. He wore a worn-out shirt, his white hair gleaming, his eyes bright but lined with the wrinkles of time. "You're the new guy here, aren't you?" he asked, his voice warm. I nodded, not wanting to say much. He introduced himself as Russell Moore, a former soldier living in a wooden cabin not far away. He brought a basket of tomatoes, saying his garden had produced too many. "You look like you could use a friend," he said, his smile gentle but genuine. I wanted to refuse, but something in his eyes made it impossible. Russell became the only person I talked to in Fairview. He didn't ask about my past, didn't judge. He shared stories of his life, about the war, the scars on his body and soul, the family that abandoned him after he returned from Vietnam. He lived alone with an old dog named Rusty, grew vegetables, fixed things for neighbors, and wrote in a journal every night to keep his mind from breaking. "The war didn't kill me," he once said, "and neither will the pain. You're still alive, Roman, which means you still have a chance." His words were like a small flame in the darkness. I didn't believe I deserved that chance, but Russell didn't give up. He stopped by often, bringing vegetables or just sitting to drink coffee and talk about the weather. He never pushed me to talk about my past, but sometimes he looked at me with eyes that seemed to understand. "Pain is part of life," he said one evening as we sat on his porch watching the sunset. "But if you let it define you, you've already lost." 5 years had passed in Fairview, and I was beginning to find a new rhythm to life, fragile though it was. My days revolved around tending the farm, from planting corn at dawn to fixing fences as the sun set. Sweat and exhaustion kept my nightmares at a safe distance, though they never truly vanished. Rebecca's pink shoe still sat on my table next to the family photo frame like a totem of guilt and love I couldn't let go. I didn't drink as much anymore thanks to Russell. He never said it outright, but the way he lived, resilient, simple despite his own scars, made me want to try, even just a little, to live better. Russell became my anchor, though I never said it aloud. He'd share stories of the war, of friends lost, of how he coped with PTSD by journaling and caring for his dog, Rusty. "Write it down, Roman," he said once, handing me an old notebook. "Doesn't have to be good, just true." I tried, but every time I picked up the pen, I'd manage only a few lines before the image of that pink shoe flooded my mind, and I'd snap the notebook shut. Russell didn't push. He'd just smile, pat my shoulder, and say, "You'll get there when you're ready." Something strange I noticed in the last 2 years. My parents stopped calling. Before, they'd ring constantly, always with a reason tied to money. "Just a little, Roman, to get us through this rough patch," Mom would say, her voice sweet but calculated. I'd send the money like a habit, though each time it felt like buying temporary peace. Then suddenly the calls stopped. I didn't think much of it at first. Honestly, I felt relieved, like a weight had lifted. I told myself maybe they'd finally figured out how to manage, or they'd realized I had nothing left to give. I was wrong. One crisp autumn morning, I drove my old pickup truck to take Russell to a doctor's appointment in the next town. His joints ached, a remnant of his war years, and I'd become his unofficial driver. We chatted idly on the way, about crops, Rusty, how I should repaint the wooden house before winter. I sped up a bit on the empty road, not thinking much of it, until flashing police lights appeared in my rearview mirror. I pulled over, sighing. "Probably speeding," I said to Russell, trying to sound casual. He chuckled. "Watch out, Roman, don't let them hit you with the big fine." The officer, a middle-aged man with a stern face, approached. "License and registration," he said, his voice flat. I handed them over, thinking it was just a minor infraction, maybe a few $100s at most. He looked at my license, then at me, then back at the license. His face tightened like something wasn't right. "Wait here a moment," he said, heading back to his patrol car with my license in hand. A chill ran down my spine, though I didn't know why. Russell glanced at me, frowning. "Something wrong, Roman?" "I don't know," I replied, but my heart was beating faster. The officer returned, now with a colleague. They stood by my truck, talking in low voices. Then the first officer looked at me, his eyes full of suspicion. "Roman, right?" he asked, his voice slow and deliberate. I nodded, unease rising. "Can you step out of the vehicle? We need to talk." I stepped out, my legs shaky, not from fear of a ticket, but from something in the officer's tone that felt like the start of a new nightmare. Russell watched from the truck, his face etched with worry. The officer led me a few steps away and said, his voice low as if trying to stay calm, "According to our records, Roman Wright died 2 years ago." I froze, as if someone had punched me in the face. "What?" I stammered, my voice breaking. "What are you talking about? I'm standing right here." The officer studied me, his expression a mix of doubt and confusion. "The records show you were declared dead. Death certificate, doctor's signature, all legal. You need to come with us to the station to sort this out." My head spun, the ground beneath me seeming to crumble. I looked back at Russell, who was opening the truck door, stepping out with concern. "What's going on, Roman?" he asked, but I couldn't answer. I just shook my head, trying to process what I'd heard. Dead? How could I be dead when I was still breathing, still living, even if my life was just a shadow of what it used to be? On the way to the station, I sat in the back of the patrol car, hands trembling. They didn't cuff me, but I felt like a criminal. Russell came along, sitting beside me, silent but placing a hand on my shoulder as if to say he was there. My mind swirled with 1,000 questions. A death certificate? Who did this? And why? At the station, the atmosphere was heavy, like a storm about to break. The small, cramped interrogation room with its drab gray walls and cold metal table made me feel suffocated. Inspector Miller, a tall man with salt and pepper hair and eyes sharp as knives, sat across from me, flipping through a thick file. Russell was allowed to stay, sitting in the corner like a steadfast shadow, but I still felt a crushing loneliness. "Mr. Wright," Inspector Miller began. He opened a folder and slid a few papers toward me. "This is your death certificate," he said, his voice calm but cutting. "Signed by a doctor in Orlando, along with records from Vital Records. Can you explain why your name is on this?" I looked down at the paper and my heart seemed to stop. My name, my birth date, and a date of death were clearly listed. March 15th, 2 years ago. Cause of death, traffic accident. I felt the blood drain from my face. "This isn't me," I said, my voice trembling. "I'm not dead. I'm sitting right here." Inspector Miller looked at me, his expression devoid of emotion. "We know you're sitting here. But according to the system, you're a dead man, and a substantial life insurance payout was made to the beneficiary. Do you know who that beneficiary is?" I shook my head, but deep down I was starting to piece it together. "My parents," I whispered, my voice breaking. Miller nodded as if he'd already known the answer. "That's right. Mr. Eugene and Mrs. Martha Wright. They received millions of dollars from the insurance company 2 years ago. And now, here you are, alive. You understand why we need to clear this up, don't you?" I swallowed hard, my throat dry. I don't know. They're my parents. They wouldn't. My words trailed off because deep inside, a part of me already knew. The silent phone calls, the feigned relief when they vanished from my life. All of it now came together like pieces of a horrifying puzzle. Miller slid another paper toward me, a report from the FBI Insurance Fraud Unit. "We contacted them as soon as we checked your license. They'll be here in a few hours. This isn't a clerical error, Mr. Wright. This is an organized fraud. FBI." Those letters echoed in my mind like a ticking bomb. I never imagined I'd be entangled in something this massive. They arrived faster than I expected. 2 agents in black suits, their faces expressionless. The first agent, a woman named Agent Reyes, sat down next to Miller, opened her laptop, and turned the screen toward me. "We've been tracking your file since the insurance company flagged it," she said, her voice cold but professional. "You purchased a large life insurance policy just before the accident. Beneficiaries, your parents. 2 years later, they submitted a fake death certificate, held a private cremation funeral, and collected the payout. We have evidence." I stared at the screen and my heart seemed to stop again. It was a series of bank transactions. $3 million transferred to my parents' account, then gradually withdrawn. Some of it went to paying off debts. Debts I had once covered, now cleared with my own money, even though I was still alive. The rest? A new house in the Orlando suburbs, a luxury Mercedes, even a trip to Europe. I recognized it immediately. These were the things my parents had always dreamed of, the things they demanded from me with their just to keep up appearances tone. Now they had been bought with my death. "This is your family doctor's signature," Reyes continued, pointing to a scanned document. "Dr. Harlan, who treated you after the accident. He signed off that you died of internal complications. But your medical records show you only had minor cuts. And the funeral home, Eternal Rest, where your wife and daughter's funeral was held, they filed a private cremation report with no body. No ashes, no witnesses except your parents." I shook my head, hot tears welling up. "No way. They're my parents. After the accident, they came to the hospital. They cried. But even as I spoke, I remembered their eyes. Not genuine grief, but calculation. My father, with his arrogant criticism, always treating my success as a debt he was owed. My mother, with her endless shopping bills, always seeing me as a living ATM. Reyes paused, looking at me with a hint of pity, the thing I hated most. "We understand this is difficult. But the evidence doesn't lie. We've been monitoring their accounts. They stopped contacting you 2 years ago, right when they got the money. Not because they were grieving, Mr. Wright, because they thought you were gone for good. Now that you've reappeared, they'll have to face the consequences. I sat in the station's temporary lounge, Russell by my side as I told him everything. He listened without judgment, just nodding slowly. "Family isn't always blood, Roman," he said, his voice warm like the nights we sat by the campfire. "Sometimes it's the people who choose to stand by you when the darkness comes." His words were like medicine, but the pain still tore at me. I called my parents the first time in 2 years, and my mother's voice came through, first surprised, then panicked. "Roman, you're alive? Oh my God, we thought—" My father snatched the phone, his voice stiff. "Don't say anything. We'll sort this out." But I knew there was nothing left to sort out. The betrayal was laid bare, raw and cruel. The bitterness peaked that night as I lay on a couch in the station, unable to sleep. I pictured their faces, my father's smug smile now twisted with fear, my mother's crocodile tears, not from remorse but from fear of losing their newfound luxury. I had lost my wife and daughter because of my own carelessness, but they, the ones who were supposed to love me unconditionally, had killed me again, for money. Not with an accident, but with ink and greed. I cried, not out of pain, but out of anger. Anger at myself for trusting them, at them for betraying me, and at life for testing me like this. Russell patted my shoulder as we left the station after a long night, just the two of us together. "You survived this, Roman, and you'll keep going." He was right, but at that moment I just wanted to disappear again. Yet deep down, a small spark began to burn, not for revenge, but to reclaim my life. I would face them in court, not out of hatred, but because I deserved to live, to exist, even if only on paper. The investigation moved swiftly, like a whirlwind tearing everything apart. The FBI searched my parents' home in Orlando under a court order, uncovering leftover documents, emails between my father and Dr. Harlan, a backroom deal with the funeral home owner. Dr. Harlan, an elderly man I once trusted, had sold his integrity for a few $1,000s. He confessed quickly, his voice trembling over the phone. "They said you'd taken your own life after the accident. They needed money for a proper burial. I was wrong." The funeral home was more tight-lipped, but security camera footage revealed they had staged a funeral with an empty coffin and only 2 attendees: my parents. In the days that followed, the FBI dug deeper, interviewing my old friends and reviewing financial histories. They uncovered more. My father had used part of the money to pay off secret gambling debts, while my mother bought jewelry and threw lavish parties as if living in a dream. Each new detail was another stab, but it also brought clarity. They weren't victims of circumstance. They were people who chose a crooked path. When the day of the arrests came, Reyes called me. "They've been apprehended, Mr. Wright." No resistance. I pictured the scene. My father, the arrogant man who once criticized me, now handcuffed in front of the neighbor's eyes. My mother sobbing, but not out of true remorse. Their betrayal didn't just steal my identity. It robbed me of my last shred of trust in family. But in that pain, I found a new strength. The strength to move forward, to face the upcoming trial, and ultimately to be reborn. The FBI kept in regular contact, updating me on the case. My parents, Dr. Harlan and the owner of Eternal Rest Funeral Home, were charged with a litany of crimes: insurance fraud, conspiracy, and identity theft. Agent Reyes, with her cold but determined voice, explained that this was a federal case with potential penalties of decades in prison. "We have solid evidence," she said over the phone. "The fake death certificate, bank transactions, email exchanges, all of it points directly to them. But you need to prepare yourself. The trial won't be easy, especially when you have to face them." The weeks leading up to the trial were an emotional whirlwind. I returned to the cabin in Fairview, but it no longer felt like a sanctuary. Every corner of the house, every cornfield seemed to remind me of the betrayal. I wrote in my journal more, as Russell had taught me, trying to piece together the fragments of my mind. Today I realized that family isn't always blood. I wrote, my hand trembling as the pen moved across the paper. Family is the people who choose to stand by you even when you have nothing left. The day of the trial arrived and the sky was gray with rain, as if the heavens were weeping in my place. The Orlando courthouse was a cold building with long hallways and the echo of shoes on marble floors. I wore an old suit, the only thing left from my former life, but it no longer fit. My shoulders were thinner, my body changed by years of labor in Fairview. Russell sat beside me in the courtroom, his steady gaze like a lighthouse in the dark. "You're stronger than you think," he whispered, and I clenched my fists to stop myself from trembling. My father, Eugene, looked much older, his hair thinning, his eyes avoiding mine as if I were a ghost he didn't want to face. My mother, Martha, still tried to maintain an air of elegance in her cashmere sweater, but her face was pale, her eyes red as if she'd been crying. They didn't look at me, not once, even though I sat in the front row. I had hoped, even just a little, that they would look at me with remorse, that they would see me, their son, still alive, still breathing. But their silence, the way they bowed their heads as if I didn't exist, made me feel like I was truly dead in their eyes, not just on paper. The trial began, and the prosecutor presented the evidence. They showed the fake death certificate with Dr. Harlan's signature, emails between my father and the funeral home about the private funeral, and bank transactions detailing how they spent the insurance money. Each piece of evidence cut deeper into the truth, not just because of the betrayal, but because I realized they felt no remorse. I looked at my mother, hoping to see a hint of regret, a sign that she still saw me as her son. But she only bowed her head, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief as if she were the victim in this story. My father sat upright, lips pressed tight as if clinging to his last shred of pride. I wanted to scream, to stand up and ask them, "Why? Why could you do this to me?" But I just sat there, hot tears streaming down, not from pain, but from utter disappointment. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the stand, my legs heavy as lead, feeling like the whole world was watching and judging me. Standing before a room full of strangers, I felt exposed, as if every scar in my soul was laid bare. The prosecutor asked me about my life after the accident, why I left Orlando and why my parents stopped contacting me. I spoke, my voice trembling but clear, about my years in Fairview, about how I tried to rebuild my life from ashes, and about the pain of losing Angela and Rebecca. But when I looked at my parents, my emotions overflowed. "I supported you for years," I said, my voice choking, tears streaming uncontrollably. "I did everything to help you, even when I lost everything, my wife, my daughter. But you declared me dead. You chose money over your own son." My father finally looked at me, but his eyes held no remorse. "We needed the money, Roman," he said, his voice cold, like he was explaining a business deal. "You were gone, useless. I thought you'd understand." His words hit like a punch, not just to my face, but to my heart. My mother sobbed, but her words were even crueler. "At least the money wasn't wasted. We lived better, Roman, can't you see that?" I turned away, not wanting them to see me break. My tears fell, but not from pain, from anger. From the crushing disappointment of realizing I was never truly their son. I was just a tool, and when that tool lost its value, they were ready to discard it. My heart felt torn apart again, not because I lost them, but because I lost the last shred of faith in what I once called family. The prosecutor finished questioning, but I don't remember how I returned to my seat. Russell gripped my hand, saying nothing, but his presence was enough to keep me from collapsing. The verdict came at the end of the week. My father received 12 years in prison, my mother 10 for insurance fraud and conspiracy. Dr. Harlan lost his medical license and was sentenced to 7 years. Eternal Rest Funeral Home was shut down, its owner receiving 5 years for complicity. As the sentences were read, my parents didn't look at me. They just bowed their heads, led away in handcuffs, and I felt a strange emptiness. Justice had been served, but it didn't bring Angela and Rebecca back. It didn't erase the pain of betrayal. After the trial, I faced a long journey to restore my legal identity. The FBI helped me obtain a new social security number, driver's license, and bank accounts. Each step was a battle with bureaucracy, but when I received my new ID, I held it in my hand, feeling like I'd been born again. My name, Roman Wright, now existed officially, no longer a shadow in the records of the dead. Russell came to visit me that evening, bringing a bottle of homemade cider. We sat on the porch, gazing at the star-filled sky. "You did it, Roman," he said, his voice warm and steady. "You stood up, faced them, and reclaimed yourself." I managed a faint smile. "I'm not sure if I really did, Russell, but I'm trying." He nodded, raising his glass of cider. "That's enough, kid. That's enough." The night air in Fairview always had something comforting about it. The chirping of crickets blended with the cool breeze carrying the scent of freshly cut grass and damp earth. I sat there, clutching my glass of cider, feeling Russell's presence like a sturdy anchor in the storm I'd just weathered. The trial was over. My parents and their accomplices had been punished, and my legal identity had been restored. But the victory didn't bring the joy I'd once imagined. It left only a void, not the emptiness of pain, but a strange sense of freedom, as if I'd been released from an invisible prison. In the days that followed, I began to think about the future. The wooden cabin in Fairview, with its rusty tin roof and creaky windows, had been my refuge for 5 years. But I realized I didn't want to just hide anymore. I wanted to live, truly live. Not for fame or money, but for what Angela and Rebecca had once given me: love, joy, and meaning. I wanted to build something not just for myself, but for those around me, the people who had accepted me without needing to know my past. The idea of a community farm came to me one morning while I was watering vegetables at dawn. I wanted to turn my small plot of land into a place where people could come, work, share, and find the peace I had found in Fairview. Not to make money, but to create a community, a new family not based on blood but on empathy and support. I shared the idea with Russell, and he let out a hearty laugh, his eyes sparkling. "You're starting over, Roman. That's something Angela and Rebecca would be proud of." I got to work. With the money left from selling my company years ago, I bought more land, fixed up the barn, and built a small area with wooden tables and chairs for people to gather. I called it Peaceful Farm, a name that sounded a bit cheesy, but to me it held deep meaning. I hired a few locals to help, and they came with an enthusiasm I hadn't expected. Mrs. Deborah from the general store brought homemade jam jars to sell, and Mr. Joe from down the road contributed an old trailer for hauling produce. Slowly but surely, the farm became a part of Fairview, a place where people didn't just come to buy vegetables, but to talk, laugh, and share everyday stories. I hung a framed photo of Angela and Rebecca in a prominent corner of the farm's main building. Every morning as I opened the doors, I looked at them and whispered, "I'm trying, my love. I'm trying, sweetheart." The image of Rebecca's pink shoes was no longer just a source of pain. It became a reminder. I couldn't waste this second chance. Every cornstalk I planted, every smile I received from the townsfolk was a way to atone, to live a life worthy of the love they had given me. Russell became an indispensable companion. He came to help on weekends, despite his joints not being as nimble as they once were. We planted vegetables, fixed fences, and sat drinking cider on evenings. "You and I are alike, Roman," he said one night as we sat by a fire. "We've both been hurt, but we still choose to get back up. That's what makes us human." The people of Fairview started to see me as one of their own. They no longer looked at me with curiosity or pity. Instead, they called me Roman of Peaceful Farm, and every time I heard that name, I felt like I was starting to belong. One afternoon, as I helped Mrs. Deborah arrange jam jars on a shelf, she took my hand and said, "You've brought something special to this town, Roman. Thank you." I just smiled, unsure how to respond, but inside I felt an acceptance I hadn't known since leaving Orlando. Life at the farm wasn't always easy. There were days of rain and wind that ruined crops, Nights I stayed awake, haunted by memories of Angela and Rebecca. But I no longer ran from the pain. I learned to face it, to let it become a part of me, but not the entirety of who I am. Russell taught me that life isn't about erasing the past, but about learning to live with it and turning it into a driving force to move forward. I followed Russell's advice, reflecting on my journey, from the glorious days in Orlando, through the edge of tragedy, to the years of self-imposed exile in Fairview, and now, a new beginning. I had lost everything, not just once, but twice. First Angela and Rebecca because of my own mistake, then my identity because of the greed of those I once called family. But in those ashes I found lessons etched into my soul, lessons I want to share, not to preach, but to remind myself, and perhaps you too. Family isn't always blood. I once thought my parents, despite being selfish and demanding, still loved me in their own way. But their betrayal, declaring me dead to collect insurance money, laid bare the harsh truth. They chose money over me, and that hurt more than any wound I'd ever endured. But in Fairview, I found a new family. Russell, with his war stories and quiet resilience, became my spiritual father. Mrs. Deborah, Mr. Joe, and the townsfolk, with their unconditional kindness, gave me a community to belong to. True family is the people who choose to stay by your side even when you have nothing left to offer. Money can buy luxury, but it can never buy integrity. My parents used the insurance money to pay off debts, buy a house, buy a car, live a life they thought was deserved. But the cost was their honor, their humanity, and ultimately their own freedom. I had once been swept up in the whirl of money and fame, thinking they would bring happiness. But when I lost Angela and Rebecca, I realized that no amount of money, no fame could replace the love and presence of loved ones. Life truly begins only when you face the truth, no matter how painful it is. I ran away from Orlando, from the pitying stares and accusatory whispers, thinking isolation would help me forget. But the truth never disappears. It waits, patient and merciless, until you have the courage to confront it. When I stood in court, looking at my parents and hearing them justify their betrayal, I realized that living in lies might be easier, but it never brings peace. Only when I accepted the past, my mistakes, my sins, and their betrayal, did I find the path to move forward. Don't trade love and family presence for work or money. If I had listened to Angela, if I had put down the phone that day, perhaps I would still have her and Rebecca with me. One moment of carelessness took it all, and I'll live with that pain until my last breath. I once thought work was the center of the world, that success would define me. But success doesn't hold you when you cry, doesn't hold your hand when you're scared, doesn't laugh with you under the sun. Only family does that, and I learned this lesson at the highest price. Be wary of greed, even from the closest people. When it comes to money and possessions, human nature can reveal itself in ways you never expect. My parents, whom I once thought would always protect me, chose money over their son. They weren't monsters, they were just human, weak, and easily tempted. But that truth doesn't make the pain any lighter. It only teaches me that trust, even in blood, must be measured. And above all, if you're still breathing, you still have a chance. Russell said this to me, and I listened, though it took years to believe it. I lost my wife and daughter, lost my reputation, lost even my legal identity. There were nights I thought I couldn't go on, that death would be easier. But every morning as the sun rose over the cornfields, I found a reason to get up. Opportunity isn't about reclaiming what's lost, but about building something new. A life, imperfect but worth living. One afternoon, as I closed up Peaceful Farm, I stood silently before the framed photo of Angela and Rebecca. The sunset filtered through the window, illuminating their smiles, and I felt my heart lighten. I was no longer the Roman Wright of Orlando, the man with big dreams and even bigger mistakes. I was Roman of Fairview, the man learning to live again day by day, moment by moment. I whispered to them, my voice trembling but resolute. I lost everything, but I also found myself again. Russell walked in carrying a basket of fresh tomatoes from his garden. "Talking to them again?" he asked with a gentle smile. I nodded, smiling back. "They're my light, Russell. And so are you." He laughed heartily, clapping me on the shoulder. "Well then, that's good. Now go get some more cider. Tonight we celebrate." I did as he said, and as we sat under the star-filled sky, I felt a profound peace. Peaceful Farm, Fairview, Russell, and all the simple folks around, they were my new family, proof that life, no matter how painful, is still worth living. I had lost everything, but I also found a new path. And as long as I breathe, I'll keep walking it, carrying the love of Angela and Rebecca and the reminder that no matter how thick the darkness, the light is always there waiting for me to find it.